gone into hospitals to kill wounded opponents.
Scott Heidler is following events at the UN. Here's the latest from the headquarters in New York.
After a briefing by Secretary General Ban Ki-moon of just how dire the situation is in Libya, the Security Council also heard an emotional plea from the Libyan ambassador to the United Nations. That is when there was a draft resolution floated to be reviewed by the members. It was drafted by the United Kingdom and France, and in that resolution it calls for a referral to the International Criminal Court for possible crimes against humanity. There's an arms embargo and a travel ban for Gaddafi's inner circle. Now, this resolution, a draft resolution, is going to be looked at again by a special session Saturday by the Security Council, and all indications are right now that it's expected to pass. Now, it has broad appeal, and that's not just from Western nations. There has been a unified voice of the international community that something needs to be done in Libya, and it appears as though Saturday is possibly when the Security Council will actually do something.
All right, let's run through some of the main stories here on Al Jazeera this hour now. Iraq's largest oil refinery has been attacked by gunmen. Officials at the Beji complex in northern Iraq say the men planted bombs and set the plant on fire. One engineer is being killed and another injured. US President Barack Obama has imposed sanctions on the Libyan leader Muammar al-Gaddafi and 4 of his children. And the UN chief, Ban Ki-moon, is urging the Security Council to take concrete action over the Libyan crisis. But the Libyan leader, Muammar al-Gaddafi, has made another defiant appearance on state television, telling his supporters he'll fight on to the end. Well, Libya, of course, not the only country where protests are taking place. There have been angry confrontations between activists and soldiers in Egypt. That's, of course, just 2 weeks after President Hosni Mubarak was toppled. Protesters want the military to replace the cabinet appointed by Mubarak, but they say soldiers beat them with batons and fired into the air to disperse them. There's been a big show of support for the Yemeni president in the capital, Sana'a, but tens of thousands of people across the country have joined marches against the long-running rule of Ali Abdullah Saleh. Well, he's ordered the formation of a committee to open talks with protesters who are demanding he should step down. In Jordan, more demands for political and economic reforms and another strong police presence in the capital, Amman. Calls were made to limit the powers of King Abdullah. Well, the leader of Jordan's largest opposition group, Hamza Mansour, says people's patience is running out because of the government's slow moves towards reform. To Tunisia now, where the so-called Day of Rage has been taking place against the interim government. Thousands of demonstrators demanded the resignation of former loyalists to the deposed president. Al Jazeera's James Bays is in Tunis.
There are thousands of people here. It's estimated this is the biggest protest in Tunisia since Ben Ali was forced to flee from this country. People here say that the protests have moved to other countries, the protests that were first started here in Tunisia, and in some ways they feel that this country has been forgotten. They say their revolution is an unfinished one.
We are here because we believe that the dictator has gone, but dictatorship is still here. The system of dictatorship is still ruling right now.
If Ghannouchi is still here, because that means Ben Ali is here also. We are all way again in injustice. We are suffering again because Ghannouchi is the same like Ben Ali.
You got rid of Ben Ali. Tell me why you are still protesting.
Because the system is the same. Nothing has changed. The dictator is gone, but dictatorship is still here.
It's now some 6 weeks since Ben Ali was forced to leave this country. The protests after he left were relatively small, people unhappy with the Prime Minister Ghannouchi. Well, now those protests are growing again. This is the largest protest in Tunisia since the fall of Ben Ali, and it shows you that even though the world's attention is now on Libya, in some of those countries that have already had revolution, things are far from over. James Bays, Al Jazeera, Tunis.
Well, southern Sudan will become the world's newest country on July the 9th, and with it comes the daunting task of state building. Much of the south was destroyed during the civil war, and officials are starting from scratch. Creating jobs is one of the many challenges. Harun Mutasa reports from Juba.
18-year-old Gloria is gaining some much-needed skills. According to the United Nations, around 85% of adults in southern Sudan can't read or write. That's why this auto mechanics class could give Gloria the head start she's looking for.
Others are getting afraid because there are no jobs. If you have certificate, you will not get a job here in southern Sudan. But if you have the knowledge of doing such things, it will help you.
Many schools were destroyed during the Civil War. Juba Technical College is being rebuilt by Plan International, one of many non-governmental organizations working in the region. Southern Sudan will gain independence on the 9th of July. Job creation is one of many challenges facing this new nation. There are no unemployment figures, but officials say the number is far too high. Victoria is looking for anyone who can employ her as a social worker, but there are no vacancies.
You can see many people there looking for jobs and they are not getting anything to do. Yeah. Then some of them maybe they may think to go and do some other things like business, but it's very hard to start.
Officials hope to one day have a dynamic economy that will create jobs, but right now the resources simply aren't there.
The challenges are actually those connected with funds. So to counter this, people will have to sit down and try to plan better how to manage these finances.
But it's not just about creating jobs for those already in southern Sudan. Officials say close to 400,000 Southerners still living up in the north plan to head back to the region, and some fear this will put more pressure on already stretched resources. Aid agencies say hundreds of thousands of people have returned in the last few months. Sustainable development is crucial for a people hoping independence will improve their lives by creating a steady stream of work. Harumutasa, AlJazeera, Juba, Southern Sudan.
Well, police in New Zealand say the death toll in Tuesday's earthquake has gone up to 145, with more than 200 people still missing. That number is expected to rise further. Search teams from 6 countries have flown in to help local rescuers, but no survivors have been found since Wednesday. Violent aftershocks continue to hit the shattered city of Christchurch. Andrew Thomas is there.
Well, a high death toll already, but one that looks likely to rise as more and more bodies are pulled from the rubble. No survivors have now been found for more than 3 days, and the prospects of that now vanishingly small. A flutter of excitement on Saturday when rescuers thought they heard some sound underneath the rubble, only for a cat to run out. Nobody alive under there. As well as the big clean-up that's trying to go on in town, a massive clean-up operation is also going on in the suburbs, where silt that rose up through the earth when the earthquake hit has to be cleaned up. They call that liquefaction, and they compare it to putting your foot down on a beach and watching the water rise up around it. That water has brought up huge amounts of silt and mud, and that mud needs to be cleared, and it's a huge, huge job. In some cases, the mud is waist height. It really is an amazing sight out there. And also, of course, people don't have power, they don't have water, so trying to get food to those people, hot food particularly. A helicopter run has been going on Saturday, bringing in hot food to suburbs from a town where they do have power and water. They're making the food there, they're keeping it hot, they're shuttling it in by helicopter, and people in the suburbs, therefore, having their first hot meal in days.
Well, Russia has chosen an official mascot for the 2014 Winter Olympic Games in Sochi. It was a closely fought race, but one controversial choice was excluded from the final shortlist despite gaining majority of the public support on the internet. Neve Barker has more now from Moscow.
It's the face Russia doesn't want you to see. A creature like no other. This is Zoich, munching on a ski pole, spinning Olympic rings for eyes. He's hardly the kind of mascot Russia wants representing the country. Still, unlike the other competition entrants, he's gained a massive cult following online.
It was meant to be an entirely public internet contest, but in the end, the Olympic Committee chose the finalists themselves, so the competition didn't really mean anything.
Zoich may have been deemed inappropriate by the Olympic Committee, but perhaps without even knowing it, he's become a symbol of the hopeless state of the country's political opposition. Yegor is currently working on a satirical cartoon based on President Medvedev called Captain Obvious, a reflection, says Yegor, on the president's policies.
The Olympics will be a major money spinner for Russia. Sports stores like this are already capitalizing on hosting the event, and branding is everything if the nation wants to recoup some of the billions spent on hosting the Olympics.
As for Zoic, well, he's got commercial plans of his own. Look out for T-shirts and other merchandise in the not-too-distant future. Neve Barker, AlJazeera, Moscow.
And in Brazil, a baby girl has made a remarkable recovery after her parents' car plunged into a river. One-year-old Crystal apparently spent 20 minutes underwater before being pulled out and given the kiss of life. After an anxious wait, rescuers cheered her seemingly miraculous recovery. She's now in intensive care in hospital. This is Al Jazeera, and these are the stories making the headlines now. Iraq's largest oil refinery has been attacked by gunmen. Officials at the Beji complex in northern Iraq say the men planted bombs and set the plant on fire. One engineer has been killed, another injured.
We've just spoken to the deputy director, actually, of the Beji complex, and he tells us that at about 4 in the morning, gunmen did burst in, but the major injuries and the one casualty of an engineer was caused by bombs that were set off and smoke inhalation. Essentially, these gunmen burst in, laid bombs, set them off. They set the refinery on fire, that part of the refinery, essentially shutting it down and killing one of the engineers. Another one was seriously wounded. Now, this is expected to take that part of the refinery out of commission for the next several weeks. He actually says one of the problems has been that it was underprotected, and they will have to beef up security.
The bombing follows anti-government rallies throughout Iraq. These pictures appear to show police firing at protesters in the Iraqi city of Fallujah. 12 people are reported to have been killed in nationwide demonstrations. In Libya, protests are entering their 9th day, and they've been gaining more support from inside and outside the country. These pictures appear to show soldiers switching sides in Zawiya. They're welcomed by jubilant protesters. Elsewhere in the capital, the Libyan leader addressed supporters in person, promising to fight on and hang on to power. The international community has been weighing in on the sanctions now, with those measures being imposed from the US and NATO, plus a call for action from the UN chief. There have been angry confrontations between activists and soldiers in Egypt. That's 2 weeks after President Hosni Mubarak was toppled. Protesters want the military to replace the cabinet appointed by Mubarak. But they say soldiers beat them with batons, used tasers and fired into the